it really does make you wonder how much she saw her child as a human being and how much she saw her as an object in a way that she could use to get her needs met.
A 7-year-old cancer patient with a laundry list of complicated illnesses turns out to be perfectly healthy. Investigators say the girl's ill health was an attention and money-grabbing scheme orchestrated by her mother.
It's very, very clear that she put her own needs and desires and her goals above her daughter's.
The story making national headlines after 41-year-old Pamela Reed was arrested on January 8th and charged with theft by deception. Investigators in Pleasant City, Ohio say Reed created a years-long narrative that her now 7-year-old daughter was sick, even creating a Facebook page in support. In order to maintain the girl's anonymity, we'll call her AR, which she's referred to as in court documents. Investigators say Reed accepted thousands of dollars of donations on AR's behalf, eventually fessing up to cops, saying she posted those statements simply because she liked the attention. Clinical and forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston says that's a landmark symptom in a case of Munchausen's or Munchausen's by proxy.
So Munchausen by proxy is interesting because it has so many different names. It can be very, very confusing. From a forensic perspective or law enforcement, it's often called medical child abuse because the focus then is on the child as opposed to the perpetrator. But Munchausen by proxy, in psychologist terms, is actually called fictitious disorder imposed on another. These are really interchangeable terms. And it's basically someone, often a mom, who imposes, she either fabricates or she actually creates fake illnesses in her children, or it could be an elderly adult, but somebody that she is taking care of, with the purpose of getting attention or sympathy and support from other people.
The term became part of everyday zeitgeist throughout the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, the woman convicted in the murder of her mother after years of psychological and medical abuse.
Why were you in a wheelchair in June of 2015?
Because my mother forced me to be in one.
Do you know why you were forced to be in a wheelchair?
No, sir, she just forced me to be in one.
And how long had you been in a wheelchair as of June of 2015?
Since probably I was about 8 years old.
In that case, Gypsy's mother, Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, claimed her daughter had a host of illnesses, including cancer, muscular dystrophy, and paralysis.
Did you and your mother obtain any kind of advantage by you being in a wheelchair?
Yes, sir.
What kind of advantage did you obtain?
Financial, attention, charity.
Financially mean money.
Yes, sir.
Did you obtain money as a result of you being in a wheelchair?
Yes, sir.
How did that work out? How did that happen?
Judge, I'm going to object to the relevance of that. There's been no connection.
Dee Dee was stabbed to death by Gypsy's then boyfriend in 2015. Gypsy was convicted in 2016 and released from prison late last year. Her then boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Johnston says it's likely Reed's case is also one of Munchausen's by proxy.
Well, this is obviously a relatively new case, and we're learning stuff as we go. But from the facts that have presented so far and that have been publicized by the police department, she certainly seems to fit many of the characteristics that we see in moms who have Munchausen by proxy.
According to officials with the Noble County Sheriff's Office, several local organizations contributed to fundraisers to support AR. One local company even donating $8,000.
Now, one of the questions, of course, becomes, what about money? Because that becomes very, very difficult to separate out, because you do have people, of course, who make up things for money. And so sometimes those goals can coexist with each other. Sometimes the primary goal is attention and sympathy, and money becomes kind of a bonus. And the way to kind of tease that out is just by looking at the history. If, for example, it's money, you would expect potentially there to be other, maybe theft in her background or some other kinds of fraud or things like that. If it's primarily motivated by attention and sympathy, about a third of people who perpetrate Munchausen by proxy actually at one point in their life had what we call Munchausen. They were presenting symptoms of illness in themselves.
It's still unclear what Reed's true motivation was.
Well, I think we oftentimes look for the either or. Is it A or is it B? And we know that human beings are pretty complex. And so oftentimes the motives are both. The question then becomes which came first? And from a practical standpoint, does it matter? Because the end result can be the same. So oftentimes people who perpetrate, Munchausen by proxy, because they're out there and they're talking about it, they're getting all this attention, people oftentimes will even start offering to help them. And so they start getting money and it just kind of becomes a snowball. And then, of course, you have sometimes people who the primary goal, or at least the goal at the beginning, was to scam other people and get them to donate money. And then they start feeding off the attention. To set up a GoFundMe, you think, well, that sounds like a monetary gain. But somebody who's posting every day on Facebook and they're not asking for money, you think, well, they're not directly seeking monetary gain here. They're clearly seeking for attention and sympathy. And oftentimes perpetrators of Munchausen by proxy want to be seen as kind of a martyr, somebody who's just kind of the stoic person in the face of this horrible illness their child is experiencing. And they're really often very skilled at pulling other people in.
But it is clear Reed facilitated a community of support for her daughter. The Facebook group that supported AR and gave updates has more than 1,000 followers and 1,000 more likes. That's where Reed made posts like this one, writing, quote, "We pray our current treatment plan is just what Miss AR needs to put her into remission. And mommy loves you, baby girl." Just 2 days before her arrest, Reed made a similar post on her personal Facebook page, writing in part, quote, "Our hearts are shattered with every single treatment, every single tear, and every single night we have to explain why her, because we don't have that answer." There were many different posts and photos and updates, and a lot of the time there was an outpouring of support for her daughter. She was even saying herself, "I love you so much, we'll get through this together," things like that. But she created this facade of these illnesses. Is it possible? Did she really love her daughter?
I will say this. It is very clear, if these facts are true, that she put her own needs consistently above those of her daughter. Can I say she doesn't care about her in some way? No, I can't. I've never met this person, but anybody who will perpetrate this kind of a facade, give their daughter medication they don't need, shave their daughter's head, keep them out of school, convince her sister that her sister is seriously ill, fool family and friends. It really does make you wonder how much she saw her child as a human being and how much she saw her as an object in a way that she could use to get her needs met. So I don't know the level of attachment she has, but I certainly, again, it's very, very clear that she put her own needs and desires and her goals above her daughter's.
Investigators say Reed claimed AR was blind, had acute myeloid leukemia, and suffered regularly from seizures. Reed even reported this information to her daughter's elementary school. According to court documents, the school expressed concerns after they conducted an eye exam on AR, as they did with all the students. As it turned out, the girl was not blind and did not have cancer. Reed admitted the medical documents she'd given the girl's school were falsified on her tablet. Reed even admitted to investigators she, quote, "shaved AR's hair and it was never because of cancer treatment." Reed also obtained seizure medications because of what she reported to doctors. I'm wondering, did she know that this was wrong and just did it anyway, or was she potentially delusional?
People who perpetrate Munchausen by proxy, they are engaging in medical child abuse. And they know what they're doing. Will they admit to themselves that what they're doing is wrong? That's a whole nother issue. But she absolutely knows, if all these facts are true, what she's doing. She is actively planning these things. She shaved her daughter's head, apparently. She manufactured documents. I mean, it is astonishing at some of the cases that I've researched, the links to which perpetrators will go. They'll doctor shop. They won't show up at an appointment. If one doctor suspects this, they'll go to another one. They become medical experts oftentimes at a specific illness that they're claiming their child has. They'll ask for additional medical tests. I mean, it's frightening, and it really does put doctors in a huge bind because they rely on the reports of parents, particularly for young children, in diagnosing and treating illnesses.
Reed started posting updates about her daughter's supposed illnesses in 2017 when the girl was only 20 months old. But Johnston says it's difficult to determine how this scheme began in the first place. How does something like this start? Because it does become a huge facade. I mean, in this case, like you said, she's posting all the time about this, a lot of donation sites and pictures about updates of her daughter. But how does it go from 0 to 60, so to speak?
You know, I wish we knew more about that. I mean, there's some things that we've seen. So sometimes people will have something similar in their family background where they had a parent who got a lot of attention for some illness or was always sick or those kinds of things. Sometimes it's interesting that a parent will have a child who has some kind of an illness, not necessarily cancer or some serious illness, and they start getting all this attention from it. And then sometimes it's a person who is scamming in a lot of different ways. And they have a child and they see this child as an opportunity.
Officials say when Reed was interviewed, 2 of her daughters were there, 7-year-old AR and her 10-year-old sister. Both girls believed AR really was ill. She has multiple children, but there's only one daughter that was supposedly sick. How would she go about choosing which child would be the one to be the victim?
You know, that's again another really good question, and we don't have a clear answer to that. Sometimes it's what's going on in their life when they have a child. It could be some attachment issue that maybe they were, super stressed with the birth of this child, and they weren't with another child. It seems to be the circumstances around the child, their birth, and their early life that tends to, I think, lead to a person selecting a certain child. You know, sometimes it's the oldest. And then if they have other children, they'll then perpetrate it on them. So it really does depend on the situation and also the life circumstances around the birth and early development of the child.
Johnston says moving forward will mean a lot of changes for both girls.
I mean, I think that it is going to be an adjustment, a huge adjustment on so many different levels. I hopefully would like to think that the adults, teachers, principals, parents of classmates would do as much as they possibly can to educate their children, not give them the whole story necessarily, but at least, help them understand what has happened to some extent. There's been, some trauma that's happened, and to help them, treat these children with kindness and with love. But we can't always buffer our children from everything. And so, we know kids, I mean, I'm a mom, we know kids that when they're trying to process things, sometimes they don't do it in the best way. They'll tease or they'll make fun of or whatever. And so I think parents will do and adults will do whatever they can. I'm not sure where these children will go and what's going to happen with them eventually, but hopefully they're going to land with somebody who really loves them and cares about them and is taking care of them. But I think that there's so many changes for them just in terms of what's come out with their mom, that in some respects, I think that is a secondary issue right now for them about school.
What are the next steps that those future caregivers should take that you said are so important?
Well, I think, it's always good to cue off children for the most part, in terms of they will tell you oftentimes and show you really more than they tell you what they need. So, adults in their lives who care and love about them, I think the best thing they can do is provide consistency, provide stability for them, answer the questions honestly at an age appropriate level that these children ask. When they don't know the answer, tell them they don't know the answer. Offer, take them to see a professional and see how that goes. So I think, don't feel like you have to do things in a certain way, because children do, whether through their behavior they act out or through their words, will tell you what they need. Also educate yourself about, this particular disorder, and understand what the symptoms and signs are for yourself, and understand what it's like for children going through this. So education, consistency, love and support, and cueing off these children, I think it's going to do a lot for helping them recover.
As for what's next for Reed herself, that remains to be seen. What is the recovery, I guess, so to speak, for the defendant in this case, Pamela Reed? Should she undergo mental health screenings? What's next for her?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I know that she's facing some charges now. I'm not aware, at least right now, that she's facing anything other than kind of theft by deception. It'll be interesting to see if she faces child abuse charges in addition to that. So I think what happens to her from a mental health standpoint may be somewhat of a reflect or dependent upon what happens to her legally. But certainly, I think as part of her parole, if she does end up serving time, she definitely will need to have some very strict, I think, things in place for her in terms of being around children and those kinds of things. And hopefully she'll have access to some mental health treatment. One of the difficult things, though, I think, is that this particular disorder is very difficult to treat because oftentimes there's such denial around what is being done, the harm to the child, and those kinds of things. There have been people who've been able to kind of get over this and come to peace with what they've done and try to make amends with the children if they have any contact with. Oftentimes they don't, but it's often, unfortunately, because there have been some legal repercussions as opposed to a voluntary thing.
Reed was arraigned on January 9th and is due back in court on January 16th for a preliminary hearing. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.